I want to thank you for joining us this evening. We're very excited to offer this exciting wine show here on West Hartford Public Television. And what you'll be in store for the next, hopefully, many shows is a great selection and sampling of inexpensive wines that taste like expensive wines. And there's a big misconception out there that wines have to be expensive or fancy, or you have to buy them from the most prestigious wine stores. But that's not really true. What me and my host, James Kimbrough, will be talking about is the ability to pick out wines at any local package store or wine store that are both good, tasty, and relatively inexpensive. And in future shows, you'll be able to do blind tastings with us and your friends to show them that not always do the most expensive wines taste the greatest. Now, before we get into our first tasting, I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what the show will be about in coming episodes. Today's show will just be an introduction as to maybe some of the types of wine. We're going to be doing Spanish wines tonight. Just two. We don't want to get everybody drunk. And future episodes will entail probably 4 to 5 wines from different varieties, whether it be French, Spanish, maybe
Argentinian, South Africa,
maybe Italian.
So many great regions out there.
And we'll be sneaking in a somewhat expensive bottle with 3 to 4 inexpensive bottles and having friends and strangers taste them to see what they think tastes the best. Today's episode, though, is just really going to be the basics. We're going to start off tasting 2 Spanish wines, but before we even get that far, I just want to go over a brief concept of what you should have when you're going to drink wine. Now, obviously, James, you need glasses.
Very important.
Why are glasses important?
Well, the stemware actually shapes the wine. You're going to have different styles of glasses for different types of wine. Now, tonight we've got the same glass here, but if you're drinking a big, bold Cabernet Sauvignon, you're going to have a different glass than you would if you're going to be drinking Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc.
In general, would you use a wider glass for a red than what we have here tonight?
Yes, so you want a big bowl, a lot of swirling action in the glass, and then when you're going to smell the wine, the shape of the glass will dictate where the wine hits your tongue as well as how it gets into the nose. So it's very important to choose the appropriate stemware for the right kind of wine.
Do you think there's any benefit of some people like the tumblers, for instance? Do you prefer a tumbler or do you prefer a stem glass?
I like a stem glass. With a tumbler, there is no stem, and you're forced to hold the glass in your hand. Mm-hmm. Your hand will actually warm the wine. And we're going to talk a lot about temperature, correct storage temperature for wines later on, but warming the wine is usually not a good idea.
Especially for red, usually.
Yes.
We also have, which I'm sure some of you have already noticed, a carafe. And I think no matter what type of wine you're drinking, whether it's an inexpensive wine or an expensive wine, mm-hmm. wine benefits from breathing and opening up in something like a carafe.
Exactly. With reds especially. When you pour a wine into a decanter like this, you're getting a lot of oxygen into the wine, and that helps the wine breathe and open up, especially with the older wines. They've been laying down for quite a few years. They need time to open up before you're ready to enjoy them.
Now, in your experience, do you think there's any time frame as to when you should open up a bottle? You're having friends over, say you're going to have a dinner party. Do you want to have the wine open before they get there, or do you want to open it up when they get there?
The rule of thumb is about an hour before you're going to drink it. So if your friends are going to arrive and you're going to drink it immediately when they get there, you want to pop it and decant it about an hour before they arrive. If you're going to have, like we do, a little champagne first and then some wine later.
Which is important. Always do the champagne first.
Once everyone arrives, start drinking the champagne and then plan about an hour ahead of time and pop your red, decant it.
Now, there are some people who say that you could also use a carafe for a white wine. I don't follow that.
Not really necessary, no. This is primarily for reds.
So any varietal white really does not need to be opened up necessarily.
I wouldn't do it, no.
So while you're taking that in, we're going to open up our first bottle of wine tonight, a Merlot Tempranillo. I think it's a 55% to 45% blend. Jim will be the expert in terminology. I will be sort of just critiquing the taste of it more than the critique of the actual pronunciation. So, Jim, I know that's a twist-off bottle, and do you have any thoughts as to the misconceptions of twist-off bottles?
Well, the twist-off used to indicate that this is a very bad wine or a poor quality wine. Today, a lot of vineyards are switching to twist-offs for several reasons. Twist-off doesn't leak. Sometimes a cork will leak. That's the reason why when you store wine, you want to lay it on its side if it has a cork in it. That keeps the cork wet, keeps it from leaking. But from time to time, you'll open a bottle that has a cork in it, you'll get a musty smell. That indicates that the cork has let oxygen into the bottle, the wine's gone bad. It either turns to vinegar or it gets a very musty odor to it. It's not suitable for drinking or for cooking at that point. So some vineyards have switched to the twist-off in order to avoid that problem. Other vineyards have switched to what's called a Stelvin cap, which is a fake cork, and you'll see this in a lot of wines that are currently sold. You'll pull out a plastic cork, and again, that's not a sign of an inferior wine. That's an indication that the vineyard has switched to a newer technology in order to avoid some of the spoilage that you'd get. I think the statistic is 4 to 6% of bottles that have a cork in them go bad. And when you switch to the twist-off cap or the Stelvin cap, you avoid the spoilage. Therefore, the vineyard is able to market all of their wine.
Well, that's actually a question that I don't think anybody knows the answer to yet, is what is the lifespan of a twist-off? Has it been around long enough where we can get an adequate determination as to how long it will last?
My personal opinion is those are for wines that are not going to be stored too terribly long. You get some wine collectors who are going to put a bottle down and they'll store it for 10, 20 years before drinking it. With a twist-off, usually that's something you're going to drink within a few years.
Would you still recommend storing it this way?
It really doesn't matter.
Doesn't make a difference?
It really doesn't matter, no.
Well, I'm going to open this up. No secret to opening up a twist-off. I know there's a lot of elegance that goes into opening a bottle of wine or a bottle of champagne, but not to this type of bottle. You just give it a twist. Now, what me and James like doing a lot is having dinner parties with a lot of people over. And one thing we have noticed that when we are doing a dinner party, whether it's with wine or champagne, it's best, if you're going to do especially a blind tasting, not to get people's misconceptions up about what you're drinking. Just tell them you're going to be drinking a general variety of different types of red without getting in their mind that, oh, I'm drinking, say, a $500 bottle of Bordeaux. Say you're drinking Spanish wine tonight. Say you're drinking Italian wine tonight. But don't go into any specifics. Just have the bottles out there for them to see, but covered. See, you see the bottle, but it's covered.
Yeah, I enjoy getting their first impression and not having any kind of preconceived notions on their part. So if they don't know the price point, they don't know the region, you get a better idea of just their initial reaction to the wine.
I will pour this. Now, obviously, this hasn't breathed as long as it generally would if you were in your own home, but you get the general idea.
And when you're tasting wine, you want to give it a little swirl, get some oxygen into it, get the aroma coming out of the glass. Sometimes you'll get a lot of fruit. Sometimes you'll get a bit of an acidic aroma or a floral aroma if you're drinking whites.
It could be the studio. It could be a little cool, but I'm not sensing much bouquet on this one. It does have some legs.
You see the wine clinging to the glass, and it drips down in several different spots. Those are the legs.
And I actually find that the longer the legs, the longer the flavor on the tongue.
Yes, and it's also an indication of body. A wine with a lot more body is going to have longer legs. And again, that's not necessarily a reference to the taste, but it's more of the feel in the mouth.
The legs seem to be average.
I get a little tobacco at the end of this and some leather. Now you'll hear wine connoisseurs throw out all kinds of descriptive words when they're describing the taste of a wine, and some of it seems like items that you would never eat. You'll hear grassy, you'll hear gunpowder. I just mentioned leather and tobacco, which is in this wine. And there really are no right or wrong answers when you're trying to describe a wine. You just want to describe terms that you're familiar with. So if you taste something, and it might be something you smelled in the past and not necessarily put in your mouth, go ahead and throw that word out.
And that's one of the things, or one of the reasons I wanted to do this show, because Greater Hartford area is full of wine stores, restaurants, where people sort of really, well, to put it bluntly, sort of consider themselves wine snobs. And I want to really take that misconception down a notch. especially with some of the Spanish wines, because a lot of the Spanish wines are very reasonably priced, and I think compete with some of the best ones out there. And I think one of the reasons Spanish wines are so good and so flavorful is, well, they've been growing wine and grapes for thousands of years,
They've been doing it for quite a while.
just like the Italians have. And, you know, there's still that misconception that French wines still are the cream of the crop.
Well, that's what France wants everyone to believe, is that they make the best wines in the world. I personally think that you can find a great wine in any region, and it's really your own personal palate. Everyone's palate is different. You know, a wine that I think is great, Bob might not like. Something that he's really hyping, I might not enjoy. And then you at home might taste whatever we're having tonight and think they're both horrible. But there is a wine out there for you. And so people who have tried wines in the past and don't think that they are wine lovers just haven't found the right wine, in my opinion.
And that's also important, because when you go into a wine store or a package store or wherever you buy your wine, try to stay away from the big box names wine, or wines that just you've seen on television, or you just know that, you know, from your childhood that that's what your parents drank, and it just seems familiar. Try to walk into different sections where, you know, say they have French, Spanish, Italian, Argentinian wines, and look for obscure labels. Look for something in the price point, say between $6.99 to $12.99. And don't be afraid to try it, because a lot of times that's any wine that's under $20. Some people think, well, I'm not going to serve that to my guests because they're going to think I'm cheap. No, that's what we're going to try to get you to stop thinking that way, because there are hundreds. Well, there actually probably are hundreds.
Yeah, there are.
Unfortunately, we haven't tasted hundreds, but I'm sure there are that taste just as good as wines in the $20, $30, $40, and $50 range, if not higher.
And you touched on my big rule of thumb, which is try it before you buy it. I go to wine tastings pretty much every Saturday. You can find your local wine distributor, and they're usually going to have a wine tasting between 1 and 5 o'clock. Go in, try a couple of wines. They usually have 4 or 5 lined up. It's a great way for you to get exposed to different varietals. You know, if you only drink Cabernet Sauvignon, for example, and you go into this tasting, you'll find that they're having a Champagne tasting, they're having a Chardonnay tasting, maybe a Merlot, and then they'll throw in a Red Zinfandel and possibly a Cab. So you get to taste everything without having to put down big money for a bottle that you may or may not like. Once you find something you like, buy a lot of it and serve it, and don't be afraid to serve it to your friends.
That is true. If you do find something you like, especially at any of the local tastings that are in town or around the greater Hartford area, if you do like something, you should buy it, at least a half a case, because you might not be able to find it again. And one of the things that I found out is I've gone to tastings and I've tried a wine. I bought 1 bottle. Well, that doesn't last long.
No.
And then you want to have friends over to experience how much you enjoyed that wine, and lo and behold, you can't find it. So a plug to any of our local affiliates out there who sell wine. If you do wine tastings, make sure you sell enough of it so people can buy enough of it and keep you in business and keep people like us happy.
Just before we get to the rest
Sure.
of this, my second rule of thumb is drink wines that you enjoy. And this goes back to the whole food-wine pairing conundrum. It used to be a rule of thumb that if you were drinking red wine, you had to have red meat with it. If you're having a big, juicy steak, you wanted to have a Cab with that. Let's say that you enjoy Chardonnays, though. Don't be afraid to go out and find a Chardonnay that will match up with that steak. It's the old notion of whites with fish and poultry and reds with red meat has gone by the wayside. And now, today, people are saying, hey, just drink what you enjoy.
That's right. Do you think that reds pair well with spicy food occasionally?
Occasionally, yes. But again, it's what your palate demands. And if you have a palate that looks for Chiantis or Sangioveses, and you're going to try and pair that with a spicy food, it's going to be difficult, but there are some wines out there that can do that for you.
Absolutely,
So.
absolutely. And before we take the next sip of that one, which I think was what again?
This is the Grenache Syrah blend. It's 85% Grenache, so it's primarily Grenache, but it has a little bit of Syrah blended in with it. Again, this is another Spanish wine.
And even though it's a blend, I mean, you can get either 100% Syrah or you can get 100% Grenache. A blend is a good way to sort of, experience a combination of the flavors?
Yeah, typically, if you're drinking one varietal, it has some harsh notes to it. And so vineyards will do some blending to kind of even that out. And a Merlot is a great example. Oftentimes, Merlot will be used to even out a very strong Cab or Red Zinfandel. But in this case, they've used a Syrah. So let's give this one a taste.
Let's give this one a taste. Now, I could already see the legs on this one are a little bit thicker. It looks like it's definitely hanging up there a little bit longer than the other one. Let's see if it does the same thing on my tongue. Now, it's a noticeably different taste as compared to the first one.
I taste a lot more fruit in this one.
Yep.
And whereas this one had the harsh kind of tobacco leather finish, this one's a much easier, smoother, round, as I like to call it, finish.
Something like this probably would pair well with obviously pasta, but I think more on the meat side, either a pork dish or maybe even duck, actually, possibly, with something like this. I didn't check the color. Obviously, you probably can't see this on camera, but I think the one that we just tasted is a little bit on the darker side.
Yes, but you know, when you start looking at color, this is when you get into the snob area of wine tasting.
That's true, but I still like a little bit snobbery with my wine tasting. But what determines the color? Is it the varietal of grape? Is it how long it's been fermenting?
It is you know, there's some varietals that will have a darker color, and the quality of the grape. But again, for me, it's really just about taste. If it tastes good to you, drink it.
And that'll be the key to this show for hopefully many more episodes, is we want you to try different wines. Don't be afraid. Don't feel hesitant because it's either something you've never tried before. Go to tastings, try different wines. Let your palate explore the different varietals, and you determine what you like. But don't be sold on price. And I'll keep hammering that point in over and over on this show. Don't let price fool you, because the wines we're tasting here tonight are all under $15. And I think these would pair well with any of the blind tastings we've done in the past, I think would fool some of our snobbery friends.
Exactly. I would not be afraid to serve this to my discriminating wine friends.
And that actually leads me into another topic that I want to go into, and we'll be discussing this in other episodes, is when you are going to do, say, a blind tasting with friends, family, and so forth, is it important what you're going to pair that with for either an appetizer or a meal? Like, I know in the past when me and James have done tastings, we usually have had either hors d'oeuvres or one of your favorite things to do.
My crostini 5 ways. It's a crostini that has 5 different toppings. Each topping is designed to bring out a different element of the wine. The crostini interacts with a different part of the tongue, and when that happens, you get a different flavor from the wine. But you're jumping ahead probably to a future episode we're going to do.
That's true. I just wanted to give you a taste of where we're going, because even though we have a lot of different wines we want to share with you, we want you to understand that when you're watching the show, to think about what you want to do with wine yourself, where you want to take it. Do you just want to have a glass with friends, or do you want to do something where it's going to broaden your horizons or broaden your palate? And like you said earlier, try different varietals of wine, especially if you haven't before.
That's my favorite part about wine, is going out every weekend, going to a new location, trying 5 or 6 new wines that I've never had before. You never know when you're going to find that next diamond in the rough. And I've been doing this for a number of years and found a lot of niche wines that don't get marketed very heavily, but they have phenomenal flavors or some other characteristic about them that makes me want to share them with my friends. And it's just an ongoing adventure.
And I do want to recommend doing the Connecticut Wine Trail. I know there are pros and cons of it. I mean, I happen to like some Connecticut wines. I know, James, you...
I've done the wine trail. I really recommend it for people who are looking for a great Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon event. You can always pack a picnic lunch when you go to some of these vineyards. Buy a bottle of their wine, have your picnic lunch there. It makes a great date. It's a great way to get out and see a lot of different areas of the Connecticut state. But I have to say, they're not the best wines in the world.
Now,
I don't want to talk. I don't want to down talk.
That's okay. This is an open show. I mean, is it because they don't use 100% Connecticut grown?
No, this is just not a great area for wine growing. There are a couple of really good local grown wines, but for the most part, if you're a discriminating wine taster, you're going to be a little disappointed.
Is that both for the reds and the whites?
Especially for the reds. There are some good whites, and there are several local vineyards that actually import grapes from California, and they make some pretty good wines, but I don't count those as Connecticut wines.
Now, what about some of the upstate New York vineyards and so forth? Now, they somewhat have a good reputation too, but are they under the same category as here in New England, that they still have to import some of their grapes?
Well, no. In the Finger Lakes area of New York, you find them growing mostly Riesling, which is a sweeter wine, and that thrives very well in that environment. And I did a tour of one of the lakes. There are actually 5 or 6 lakes up there, but there's too many vineyards and not enough time. But I tasted quite a few really good Rieslings. That's actually when I fell in love with Rieslings. I had not enjoyed sweet wines up until that point. But I found so many, and there were enough variations between them that I could start to discriminate between them and pick out a few that I really enjoyed.
Well, it's interesting you should mention a story like that, which sort of opened you up a little bit to different types of wine. There was a movie out recently, I think it was called Bottle Shock.
Yeah.
And I was never a big Chardonnay guy. I mean, I still like my whites on the drier side, but I do like a Riesling. But after seeing that movie, which I think you're sort of a big fan of yourself and you could talk about.
Loved it.
I actually like Chardonnays now. It sort of made my bias towards a buttery Chardonnay, which I didn't like. Turns out there are plenty of other Chardonnays that don't have that buttery characteristic. And what about that movie do you recall that was so interesting?
The whole point of that movie was that French wines, up until the early 70s, had been the only kind of wine that people really talked about. It was French wine and then a bunch of junk.
So the American market really wasn't involved in...
The American market wasn't mature, and supposedly we're not creating great wines. But unbeknownst to the French, there were some really good vineyards in California producing some really great Chardonnays. And blind tasting was arranged between the French wines and the California wines. And wouldn't you know it, the California wines ended up winning that competition. And these were French tasters, by the way, so they had no idea that they were picking the foreign wine and let down their own countrymen.
I will say that that movie was an opening for me in regards to my bias towards Chardonnay, because after seeing it, I wanted to go out and taste American Chardonnays.
Right.
And I tried to taste as many as I could, probably more than I should have. And it turns out that I actually like Chardonnays more than I thought, because most of my experience with Chardonnays were probably on the French side.
Well, you know, the usual Chardonnay that you get from California is going to have a lot of butter or a lot of oak flavor to it.
Which even though I complained about, it turns out I still liked.
But it's a very noticeable difference from a French wine. And when the American tasters are having a California Cabs or California Chardonnay, they get a lot more flavor. With French wines, they get what's called terroir, which is more of an earthy taste.
It sort of has that minerally
Yes.
quality to it.
Yes,
Yeah.
and to a French palate, they can discriminate between the different types of terroir. They can taste more of a chalky taste to it, or more of a dirt kind of. We're going to do a whole show on French wines at some point in the future, so we'll get into this. But
I'm still partial to French wines, by the way. So, in your experience also in regards to when you go out to buy a wine and you do a tasting, say if you're not doing a tasting, when you go into a liquor store or wine store, what is it you generally look for in regards to, say you're looking for a red, do you have a certain preference that you're drawn to? You like, say, Cabs, Merlots, I mean.
Well, I love all the varietals.
You do, but right now in James' life, what rocks your boat?
I look for a lot of fruit or a lot of vanilla taste. There are a lot of great Pinot Noirs out there that have kind of a vanilla flavor to them. Sometimes a creamy quality, so it's almost like a milky texture in your mouth.
And what about Red Zinfandels? I know those are making sort of a pretty big comeback right now.
I got into Red Zinfandels about 10 years ago, and then they sort of got overshadowed by Syrah and Shiraz. But there's some great Zinfandels out there.
There are. And I think that's one of the things that I was fascinated with, because up until recently, I never even thought of trying a Red Zinfandel. And turns out that I disappointed myself for not trying it earlier because I was missing out.
Yeah.
And
well, a lot of people confuse the Red Zinfandel with the White Zinfandel.
Which
the White Zinfandel has a very bad reputation. It's
justified.
Yes, but it's if you were to rank wines on a spectrum, that would be at the low end of the spectrum. But the Red Zinfandel is completely different taste. It has a lot of body, a lot of fruit. They're bold wines. It's almost like they smack you in the face.
Now, is a red Zinfandel still mostly an American red?
You'll find those in other regions, but a lot of the really good ones are coming out of California.
That's what I thought. I mean, there's a lot of great vineyards out in Sonoma and so forth that produce some great red wines. And say, for instance, with the holiday coming up, Thanksgiving, is there any particular type of white wine that you're into right now? Like, what do you like? I'm a Sauvignon Blanc guy.
That's what I drink primarily also, Sauvignon Blanc.
And is there any good regions that are good for you right now, like Argentinian?
There's some South African Sauvignon Blancs. I serve a particular Argentinian Sauvignon Blanc all the time. It's a $7 bottle, and my friends love it.
I think I've had that one.
Yes.
And trust me, it does not taste like a $7 bottle at all. And I think that's what everybody was surprised at, because we did not know how much it cost until the end of the evening when...
Well, that just goes back to our earlier point. Try a lot of wines, especially in the lower part of the price spectrum. You'll find some great ones, and there are a lot of good deals out there, especially from some of these up-and-coming wine-producing regions. They can't price their wines at the high end and compete with California and France. So you're finding some really good deals from places like Australia, Argentina, Chile, South Africa.
Actually, it's funny because Australian wines used to be the rage for quite a while, and they sort of been surpassed a little by some of the Spanish wines that are out now and some of the other regions. But Australian wines are still...
They still make some great wines.
Pretty good.
And you could have tried a wine 10 years ago, and it's still going to taste great today, but there are other regions that have become more popular.
Well, in conclusion, I think we're just about ready to wrap up with our first show. I hope you've all enjoyed it. It was our first show, so give us a chance to give you another one. And I'm Bobby P.
And I'm James Kimbrough.
And until next time, keep us in your wine cellar.